Okay, so as you can see, the title says Panic and Pandemics, Please Hold Your Discrimination. The background is actually a picture of the COVID-19 supposed spread to all the different countries. There's not too much details of the background, but here we go. So before we get started, we have to understand two terms when it comes to viruses or any sort of outbreak when it involves medical or so. So epidemic, usually sudden growth in cases of a disease. So let's say our community, suddenly we have said disease and it's just increasing rapidly, then that would be epidemic because it's within our area. Okay, so here's my little pointer too. Rapid growth, okay? So pandemic, what makes it more scarier, you could say, or more, you should be more cautious, is when a pandemic spreads over many countries or continents and affects large groups of people, like we are experiencing with COVID-19. Okay, so before I get to the video I'm about to show is quite long, so please bear with me. It's the shortest video I could find to genuinely explain what a pandemic is. Enjoy.
Interconnected and increasingly globalized world. Thanks to international jet travel, people and the diseases they carry can be in any city on the planet in a matter of hours. And once a virus touches down, sometimes all it takes is one sneeze to spread the infection throughout the community. When humans were hunter-gatherers roaming the wild savannas, we were never in one place long enough, and settlements were not large enough to sustain the transmission of infectious microbes. But with the advent of the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, and the arrival of permanent settlements in the Middle East, people began living side by side with animals, facilitating the spread of bacteria and viruses between cattle and humans. Epidemics and pandemics come in many shapes and forms. In 2010, for instance, a devastating earthquake struck Haiti, forcing thousands of people into temporary refugee camps. Within weeks, the camps have become breeding grounds for cholera, a bacteria spread by contaminated water, triggering a countrywide epidemic. But the most common cause of epidemics are viruses such as measles, influenza, and HIV. And when they go global, we call them pandemics. Pandemics have occurred throughout human history. Some have left scars on the tissue and bone of their victims, while evidence for others comes from preserved DNA. For instance, scientists have recovered DNA from the bacteria that transmits tuberculosis from the remains of ancient Egyptian mummies. And in 2011, scientists investigating a plague pit in the City of London were able to reconstruct the genome of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for the Black Death of the 14th century. It is thought the plague originated in China in around 1340, spreading west along the Silk Road, the caravan route running from Mongolia to the Crimea. In 1347, the plague reached the Mediterranean, and by 1400, it had killed in excess of 34 million Europeans, earning it the title, the Great Mortality. It was later historians who called it the Black Death. However, by far the greatest pandemic killer is influenza. Flu is constantly circulating between the southern and northern hemispheres. In North America and Europe, seasonal flus occur every autumn autumn and winter. As the majority of children and adults will have been exposed to the virus in previous seasons, these illnesses are usually mild. However, every 20 to 40 years or so, the virus undergoes a dramatic mutation. Usually this occurs when a wild flu virus circulating in ducks and farm poultry meets a pig virus and they exchange genes. This process is known as antigenic shift and has occurred throughout human history. The first recorded pandemic occurred in 1580. The 18th and 19th centuries saw at least 6 further pandemics. In terms of mortality, none can compare with the Great Flu pandemic of 1918. The first indication of the pandemic came in the spring, when American troops in northern France began complaining of chills, headaches, and fever. Then, the following September, at a US Army barracks near Boston, soldiers started collapsing on parade, prompting their removal to the camp infirmary. As a surgeon there recalled, 2 hours after admission, they have the mahogany spots over the cheekbones, and a few hours later, you can begin to see the cyanosis extending from their ears and spreading all over the face. It is only a matter of a few hours then until death comes, and it is simply a struggle for air until they suffocate. On the SS Leviathan, a huge American transport en route to Bordeaux, sick men hemorrhaged blood from their noses, turning the decks between their bunks slick with bodily fluids. Meanwhile, British soldiers returning from northern France on furlough introduced the flu to Dover and other Channel ports, from where the virus was carried by rail to London. By the time the pandemic had run its course in April 1919, an estimated 675,000 Americans and 230,000 Britons were dead. In India alone, some 10 million were killed, and worldwide the death toll was an astonishing 50 million. But that was then. Today, planes can transport viruses to any country on the globe in a fraction of the time it took in 1918. In February 2003, for instance, a Chinese doctor arrived at the Metropole Hotel in Hong Kong feeling unwell. Unknown to him, he was harboring a new animal origin virus called SARS, short for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. Within 24 hours of checking into room 913, 16 other guests had been infected, and over the following days, 5 boarded planes to overseas destinations, spreading the virus to Vietnam, Singapore, and Canada. Flights between Hong Kong, Toronto, and other international cities were quickly grounded, and thanks to other emergency measures, a pandemic was averted. By the time the outbreak was over 4 months later, SARS had infected 29 countries worldwide, and more than 1,000 people were dead. For all that the virus was rapidly contained, however, there was little that could be done about the alarming news reports carried by cable news channels and the internet. As bloggers added to the hysteria by spreading unfounded conspiracy theories, tourism in Hong Kong and other affected cities ground to a halt, costing businesses more than $10 billion US. One business, however, did very well. Above all, SARS was a reminder that pandemics have always been associated with panic. If history teaches us anything, it is that while pandemics may start small, their impacts can be as dramatic as wars and natural disasters. The difference today is that science gives us the ability to detect pandemics right at the very beginning and to take action to mitigate their impacts before they spread too widely.
Okay, so as mentioned in the video, it went over a couple of historical pandemics and epidemics. Here are a few that may be familiar to you. Do note that influenza is seasonal. However, H1N1 and like H2 and 5, stuff like that, the severity, it fluctuates. Okay, so right now, as you know in the video, it did say the Black Death was the largest death toll. That's here. There's a really little picture of it. But here are the time periods of different diseases, how it may have been contracted, and the death toll. And here we are right now with COVID-19 at the bottom as of March 12th. So human relationships with tech. Human relationships. So being that we are a more modern society, it's quicker to just travel from point A to point B a lot sooner. As you can see from the bullet points I have listed, there are a few. As I mentioned before, they did say that influenza pandemic of 1918 was very bad. In parentheses, the Spanish flu. I'll elaborate why it was called the Spanish flu. It did not originate in Spain, by the way. And we'd always had pandemics exist, and there's always been panic related to pandemics and the urge to blame someone for said disease to come, and the urge to do something to feel in control. Right? So before I start the video, before I go into it, remember when COVID-19 was originally just in China? A lot of people did not really have trustful resources to repeat, and partial information was getting out to other people in part of the world. And as well in the United States, it seems that false information does circulate quite often. And here is an example of someone giving their opinion versus scientific facts from our beloved movie, Zootopia. Oh, sorry, guys. Based off of this, it can be interpreted in many ways and fit a lot of scenarios that are reoccurring in our lives. But just specifically for this presentation, she stated her personal opinion over factual evidence. If you did watch the movie, you know that the animals that were presenting to be savage were usually predatory animals like lions, foxes, otters, and stuff like that. So she came up with the conclusion that animals like bunnies are harmless, and that's the only way that makes sense to her. And as you can see, the media took it out of proportion, like, oh, we can't trust our friends. So that leads me to go on to a few pandemics that occurred that some communities were blamed for diseases. So usually marginalized communities are the scapegoats of pandemics and epidemics. Scapegoat's a person or a group of people blamed for mistakes or wrongdoings, or just illnesses and other things, right? So for example, we have HIV and AIDS. For the LGBTQIA plus community, specifically gay men, African and Haitian communities are blamed for this virus, right, this disease. I know, I'm pretty sure throughout your lives you heard of some type of, stay away from me when it comes to certain illnesses. And specifically with HIV and AIDS in the 80s, it was a lot tougher because if you fit into this community, you were assumed that you were associated with drug use, sex work, and infidelity. That's not necessarily the case. And also, misinformation always made people to believe that it implied death. So even if you were to seek treatment, you are going to die. And based off of misinformation, a lot of people may not or will not seek treatment, or couldn't even afford to seek treatment. And just so you guys do know, HIV related stigma still exists. It might not be present in your community, however, it is going around worldwide. Another disease virus we could talk about would be Ebola. The African community is blamed for this illness, and specifically, Ebola happens quite often in this little region in Africa, West Africa, mostly, but specifically in 2014, it was a really big outbreak. If you were in contact with any type of bodily fluids, you were more like with someone who was infected, you would more likely catch it, right? And the result would be dying. Even a lot of doctors and medical staff and a lot of other people did pass away in the process of trying to contain the virus. And even now, I don't know if you guys remember a couple years ago, people were saying, oh, stay away from me. Where are you from? The marginalized community was African community. If you were of darker complexion, you were accused of having Ebola possibly, even though we all know that it's a very aggressive illness to have, and it's not something to joke about. And even now, people who recovered from Ebola, they are still ostracized by their communities, or they feel guilty for having said illness, and sometimes you cannot return back to your normal job. You cannot even live in the community that you grew up in because of this issue. So other diseases that, this over. Other examples of diseases and their scapegoats would be the Black Plague. Europeans blame the Jewish community. Remember, Europeans Jewish communities were considered people of color around this time. And again, with the cholera, Irish Catholic people were blamed for this. And for smallpox, it wasn't necessarily a pandemic. However, in San Francisco, this caused Chinese quarantines, and there was rumors that Chinese people carried disease. And this thing, people have this idea, not everyone has this idea, that every Asian person is a Chinese person, which further explains the Chinese Exclusion Act. And white laborers would spread rumors that Chinese people carry diseases. So, foreshadowing for this current virus, there is pre-existing discrimination that exists. More about marginalized communities and people that were blamed for the flu. For 1918 flu, right? It's called, the nickname is Spanish flu. Only because there was a high number of cases of the flu in Spain at that time, and the Italians would blame the Spaniards, and the Spaniards would blame the Italians for the virus, right? And I'm not too sure if you guys did see the different communities that were actually blamed for swine flu, but one that I came across was the Mexican community. People would accuse Mexicans or people of Latinx descent of having the swine flu, And again, here we have the Asian community being blamed for SARS, H5N1 bird flu. And then now we have COVID-19, and we're seeing the history repeating itself. We have heard terms like foreign virus, Kung flu, Chinese virus. This creates a divide that already exists. I don't know if you guys are all aware, if you all are all aware of, there's Asians are the model minority, right? That statement alone tries to divide the people of color community. So it's kind of like pushing away, like, oh, this is the better group and here are the rest. However, that is not true. All people of color fall into the same group, in the same category. We are either vulnerable, marginalized, have lack of resources, things that are current issues going on living in America as a person of color. So all the false information that was advertised before the factual information flowed in, media kind of encouraged discrimination, allowing Trump and using what Trump said over a lot of media outlets. And sometimes people would absorb what they have and then spit it out as something else. So you're playing telephone with information when it comes to the virus. So here is, this is Peter Lee. He's a professor of East Asia policies at the University of Houston downtown in Texas, I believe. So just listen to what he has to say about discrimination, and he does cover the bases when it comes to if it were to come from other places. Oops, sorry.
Actually, against this kind of, sensational attack and racial profiling against the Chinese Americans and against Asian Americans. And also, I believe that the Chinese Americans and Asian Americans as a whole, they should stand up and speak up and push back on the racial profiling and the attack on them. And also, we have to understand that verbal abuse and physical assault on the minority minorities is also a huge human rights violation. And besides that, this is racial discrimination, which is totally unacceptable in today's society.
Professor, do you think we'd see these actions if this virus had originated from another part of the world, say in Europe or Africa?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Do you think we would see these same actions if this virus had emerged from a different part of the world, such as Europe or Africa?
Yes. We have to understand this. In the last 200 years, viruses of different kinds have originated in different countries from different continents, and different people have been, subjected to racial discrimination. And we have to understand that no country monopolizes the outbreak of, epidemics. So, today, of course, it happened, in China, but we understand that, the Chinese are learning a lesson, and they are taking actions to make sure that avoid future outbreaks. Now, what is important today is for the international community to stand together, not against the Chinese people, not against the Asian people, but against the epidemic.
Professor,
and also, yes.
Professor, how much does nationalism and the current political climate in many countries, the current politics, how much has that had a role in how people are acting?
And I would say it has a lot to do with it. And one of the, I'm not so much concerned about, racial profiling, racism, against Asian Americans because of the coronavirus. I'm more concerned about the spillover effect into politics, into academia, and into the American society. So I believe the media and opinion leaders, and of course the medical professionals, have a responsibility to tell people that epidemic does not respect national borders, and epidemics do not discriminate.
There's been a lot of social media campaigns online, people sharing their personal experiences. There's this hashtag from Europe, I'm not a virus. Is it making a difference? What more needs to be done?
Yes, I agree. That's a very good argument that no Asians, no Chinese Americans in the United States, and also as a matter of in other countries, are diseases. We have to stop racial discrimination. We also have to understand that the disease originated from wild animal abuse, happening in China this time, but it could happen in other countries. We have to look back in our society in the United States, and we have to ask if we also are treating wildlife animals unfairly, if we are enslaving wildlife animals in factory farms, and if we are also consuming wildlife animals. So if we can take a look in this way, we would be able to deal with this crisis,
Okay, so that was an overview of what's going on in this climate, and the reason why I chose COVID-19 was because it relates to myself, being biracial. Members of my Chinese side may have experienced, like my mom, for example, she actually encountered someone asking if she was Chinese, just flat out saying, "Are you Chinese?" Just because she was coughing. She has seasonal allergies, so it's like totally did not cross her mind that people are acting a certain way because of the virus. But that is why I chose COVID-19, and also the fact that people in public health, we do study pandemics quite often, and there's some things about pandemics that we kind of do understand, and I would just like to open the light and show everyone what we know. But what led me to this, being a public health major, or even talking about COVID-19, I guess you could say health and wellness, or health and medical, has always been in my life. My first job was actually a lifeguard. I learned how to do CPR, first aid, how to help someone if they're having a stroke, heart attack, diabetic emergency, seizures. So these are things that relates to your health and well-being, and depending on your diet can also affect how you handle your life as well. And alongside, if there was emergency, I was able to work with EMS, certain situations, the police. And I always been interested in teeth, so I wanted to be orthodontist. But then again, I also had this love for sharing health information. So I was like, why not be a health teacher? But as of right now, I currently coach high school sports at my old high school, my alma mater, Ferris High School. I coach swimming along with Melissa Vidal. And you can say swimming is not something you can find in a community like ours, right? So we do have, there are children that do not have access to certain pools and other things that our counterparts may have access to, like maybe a family membership to the YMCA. That is not always the case here. It's more about like who you know, where you know the pools are at, and if there are pools in your town. Like for example, my town, we don't have public pools. I'm not even sure if we can even use a pool that's in Montclair. Montclair is very close to me, but in Jersey City, we do have public pools at almost all of the elementary schools, and depending on your community, that's the closest pool. And we just want to get swimming, well, get children access to swimming like all the other kids, like in Texas and Florida. Swimming should be as available as that. And I also coach tennis as well. Not a lot of people play tennis, but it's a very good sport. You should join it, rally a few. And now I'm on the path of becoming a public health educator. So here are some facts about the COVID-19. I'm pretty sure everyone has been drowning in information. Just pick up what you can. Just know that COVID-19 uses RNA. RNA has spikes at the end of the cells, and it actually attacks your respiratory system. So it's very aggressive when it attacks you. And COVID-19 is actually the 7th type of coronavirus to exist. So that is why they're taking extreme precautions when it comes to practicing self-distancing and non-essential workers staying home. So coronavirus is zoonotic, which means it's transmitted from animals to people, and being from person to person, and just more people get sick. Okay, so you got to be very cautious about these guidelines that are out here. So here are some more facts, kind of, Oh, I'm sorry, I meant to go back. So vulnerable populations would include seniors, people who have lack of food, lack of resources, usually poor, economic status, poor. If you have pre-existing conditions such as respiratory illnesses like asthma, as people with asthma are vulnerable. CDC even says that pregnant people and people with HIV, however, they have no more, they're trying to update that information. So just want to be precautious when it comes to vulnerable populations. So as you know, there needs to be more supplies for our medical field. We're starting to feel that now that hospitals are running out of supplies and they need our help, and those who have the supplies they need to just donate them or drop them off. So in the midst of this outbreak, here are some resources that you can use when it comes to New Jersey. These are if you were to go to the testing sites, you have to meet these requirements. And if you're not too sure about what you should do when it comes to COVID-19, you should call the hotline. However, your wait time may vary. There's a few things about what you should do at work and at school when it comes to coronavirus here. And here's the hub for information for the coronavirus. Basically, the hub has questions like that have been answered by people, services that they offer, which you can do in your community. And here are some test sites that, like this is Paramus, Bergen Community College, PNC Bank, and Holmdel. That's Monmouth County, I believe. And then Keene University opened up on the 23rd as well. And Hudson Regional Hospital in Secaucus, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. And here are the testing sites for New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. And this one right here. I'm not too sure if you guys want me to open it up now. We'll open one at least. Yeah. So I have everything. Everything will be sent in the chat or so. And then here are some more resources. This is not specifically for New Jersey, but more of like here's one for New York and their website that they offer their information and have their protocol for their state. Here's Pennsylvania's hotline, OSHA's number, and if you are hard of hearing, there's a printable card offered, so you could just actually circle the your signs, your symptoms, and if you traveled or other information like that. And this is really important too because I know a lot of people are concerned about their jobs or so. So if you go to this website right here, you can actually look up what's going on in each state when it comes to legislation, protocols, etc. And let's not forget, mental health is very important during these times, especially when you're home or not socializing as much. Here is another source where you go to for mental health help, and also LabCorp or so. They have their link. They're doing large test sites. I believe that all test centers, you are covered by the. Don't quote me on that, but it is covered. It's supposed to be free. Um, so here I have if anyone wants to speak on something. No?
If you have any questions, feel free to like raise your hand now, use that function, or you can ask a question in the chat. Tanya, you have a question?
Well, not so much a question, but being in healthcare, I'm an LPN and I worked in a hospital, and what she was saying that the supplies are limited. Unfortunately, a situation like this where so many places have run out of supplies, in the past, from my experience, because of budgets, we've only been allowed to order a certain amount of supplies, even in corrections. Like there's things we need, like, you know, the nebulizer mask to give treatments, and we didn't have one. We'd have to go to another facility. I've been in healthcare a long time, and I've been like, you know, behind the scene, because as a unit secretary, I see so much, and I feel like, you know, it's always, no, don't order so much, don't order so much. You know, we have to wait till, you know, we get our new budget, and where healthcare has become a business. That's just my personal opinion. I love what I do because I am a nurse, but I believe in care. I do as much as I can, and sometimes more than I can, and, you know, deal with the consequences later. But, you know, I feel that that's why we've run out of so many things, because of budget cuts within the healthcare system, within the facilities. It's always, oh, I can't order till next month. They just, you know, you got to wait. Can we borrow? And I'm a type of person, I believe, you know, it's always good to have a little more. Like even in this situation here, I mean, I was raised, you know, whenever there was something on sale, my parents bought it. That's just me personally. But I mean, I hope going forward that the healthcare facilities, the healthcare system realize that we need to have these things on hand.
Yeah, exactly. So I saw from Sheila the concrete information and action of the federal government. There are some legislations on the, I believe the link I mentioned, and this one specifically. There's some pending, active, and I forgot the third one when in regards to their actual protocol and how they're handling the COVID-19. And I do know I read somewhere, due to certain protocols in the state, so this is like a political thing, if it's like a politician or so, someone of that type of status, they could choose to withhold information. I don't know how well that impacts us, but it's a negative impact, I would assume. But there's certain information that they can or cannot share, and that's unfair when it comes to an outbreak that affects all of us in our communities. So you might want to check the legislations out because they do update them, I think, daily. And here are some. So this one right here will be the data that's basically. Sorry, this data is overseeing the world, right? As far as the pandemic. And so I'll just let you guys glance at this briefly. So this is the cases. It grew within a week, and the death grew quite often. And as you can see, certain areas are greatly affected than others. Okay, so this is the New Jersey one. This is also mentioned in, I believe, the link that Crystal will send you guys, everyone, you all. And here are the current cases. Essex County is the second highest, right behind Bergen County. Monmouth County is third. So you just want to be careful, especially traveling within our areas. They keep you up to date with who's been using the hotline, total calls, etc., text and stuff. And here is a chart mapping out the calls. As you can see, it's gradually spreading. So, spreading throughout New Jersey. The lowest would be, wow, that increased a lot. The lowest would be Salem. So it's one positive test result. So that doesn't go, and don't forget the test results take a while to come in too. So that may be more. Here are my references if you need them. But if you guys can, here's an opportunity for you to fill out the survey when it comes to my presentation, if you did enjoy it, etc. If you also have any other questions, you can ask more questions. But ta-da!
Thank you so much, Asia. That was a wonderful presentation, very informative. You had some great feedback in the chat. And can we all just take a minute to applaud Asia this way? Asia, we are saying that you did a phenomenal job. Thank you so much using our American Sign Language today. So.